אוקיי, בוקר טוב ושבוע טוב. This shiur as just a second. Yes, so this shiur, as the rest of the series, is dedicated לעילוי נשמת רפאל משה ben Eliyahu. And today, בעזרת השם, we are going to learn about Rabbi Avraham Danzig. And as we had 2 weeks ago, we had the merit of having a descendant of Rabbi Rafael Bardugo, when we had a shiur on Rabbi Rafael Bardugo. And last week, I didn't know that while giving the shiur, but we had people related to the Yalkut Me'am Loez. We have the merit this week to have with us, thank you for coming, we have Guy Danzig, who's a direct descendant, as you can hear from the last name of Rabbi Avraham Danzig. We made the calculation, it seems to be around the 8th generation from the Chayei Adam. So that's, thank you for coming, and I hope that we would all enjoy this shiur about really a very special, I think a very special rabbi, a very special man, and that is both had influenced and is a representative of a certain class of what we can call the middle class Lithuanian Jew, as we would explain during the shiur. So we know very, very little about the childhood of Rabbi Avraham Danzig. We know that he was born in 1748, so 1748, and we also, it seems to be that he was born in Danzig, as his last name hints. Now, even that we are not completely sure. It may be that his grandfather was from Danzig, but he himself was already from Vilna. But I do believe that it is more from what I saw, at least. From the records I saw, it seems more accurate that he was born in Danzig. Now, Danzig nowadays is not called Danzig, it's called Gdańsk, and it is in Poland. It's a very important port city in Poland. It has a fascinating history, Danzig or Gdańsk. But for us right now, that's obviously is not the focal of our shiur. It is enough to know that when he was born, it was part of the Polish Empire or state. Later, it became part of the Prussian state. Later, it was conquered by the French. All of that in the lifetime of Rabbi Avraham Danzig. So just to understand the type of era that he was living in. Later, after his death, it became an independent city, and then it was not one of the causes, but it was a leading element in the opening of World War II, the city of Danzig. So it's a very important city. He was born there, and as I said, we know very little about his father, we know very little about his childhood. We do know that in the age of 14, he was sent to yeshiva in Prague. Now, as you understand, no planes, no trains yet. So if you are being sent to yeshiva in Prague and you are 14 years old, you are going to walk your way from, that's how lives were lived. So he was going to walk his way. And in his last will, we have his last will, which is called Beit Avraham, and it was written in this is a very nice edition of the Chayei Adam, that is his major work, we speak about. That's a very nice edition, which, as you can see, is not mine. I borrowed it from the library of the yeshiva, but I fell in love with it, and we would have a copy not soon enough. Let's have a copy of our own. So in the second volume of this edition, they printed also his last will, which is called the Beit Avraham, meaning the house of Avraham. That is his orders, right, to his household, to his children. And in the last will, he writes the following. You have it in source Aleph in your source sheet. He says, גם ההתחברות אל רשעים פועלי אבן, אף שהם מאמינים, על כל פנים משחית העבודה שאנו מחויבים לעבוד את השם. So he says, you should distance yourself from being friends of evil people. He says, even if they present themselves as מאמינים, that's a very interesting remark. He says, even if they show themselves to be what you would call today religious, right? But if they are רשעים, distance yourself from them. Why? Not only because they may do wrong to you, but also they may corrupt your own personality. So make sure to befriend people that you want to emulate, we would say that. And he says, when I was 14 and I was on my way to ישיבות, when time came that my father would bless me, הגיעה השעה שיברך אותי אדוני אבי ז"ל קודם הנסיעה כנהוג. So again, it's amazing to think about that. So a 14-year-old boy is going to the yeshiva, is not coming back maybe once a year. And his father is giving him his last blessing before going away. And what would you say as a father, what would you say as a mother to a 14-year-old boy that is now leaving home? That's a very difficult situation. And his father told him, אמר לי בזה הלשון, he told me the following language, בני, אתה נער ורח. My son, know that you are still a little child, and you are רך, you are soft, you are soft. So that's an interesting observation of the father to his son. תן לי תקיעת כף, so you'd be easily impressed. So give me תקיעת כף, give me an oath, give me a handshake, but that means an oath. שלא תתחבר רק עם חבורת עובדי השם. So what was the recommendation of his father? Find good friends. Find good friends. וכן נתתי תקיעת כף לאדוני אבי, and that's what I did. I gave him my hand. וברוך השם קיימתי דבריו, and ברוך השם I was able to follow his words, his warning. וכמה שבועות שהייתי בדרך, it took a few weeks, several weeks, to walk from Danzig to Prague, so for a few weeks, והייתי בדרך בחברת לא טובים. Who knows who is walking in these paths and is looking for these young boys? That's almost crazy, right? To send someone, I mean, nowadays even a 17-year-old boy, I don't know if you would send, but 14 years old, and the roads were, you know what roads were? There were thieves, there were gangs, there were everything that you want, anti-Semitic, anything that you would want was there. And he says, I was בחברת לא טובים. I was in the company of some no good, לא טובים, that's easy to translate, no good people, good for nothing people. וכמעט נטיו רגליי. Says I was very close to fail. Meaning, if I understand correctly, to join them and never to reach the yeshiva I was sent to. That's what I read into what he's saying here. והשם ברחמיו הצילני מידם תכף. But God had saved me when I remembered the promise I made to my father, I was saved. So that's what we know more or less about his youth. Not too much beyond that. We know that he came to the Prague, and he went to what we call today, I guess, a high school yeshiva. Obviously, the whole system was very different. There was no high school. But a high school yeshiva from the age of 14 to the age of 18. Now, Prague was a very strong Jewish city at the time. You had Rabbi Yonatan Eibschitz in Prague. We spoke about him at length. We had the Noda Yehuda, also Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, that we spoke about at length in their own shiurim. And he comes there, but he cannot yet attend this higher yeshivot of the Noda Yehuda and Rabbi Yonatan Eibschitz, I guess because he was too young, or maybe he was not as learned. So he first went, as I said, to some type of a prep school, maybe. And he's going, there was a yeshiva there of a certain Rabbi Yosef Lieberman. I don't think that he's known today in any way, but back then he was a big name. His yeshiva was very known. And he studied under Rabbi Yosef Lieberman for 4 years, from 14 to 18. Again, how many times he came home during these years? I have no answer. I don't know. We are not being told anything about that. At the age of 18, he gets, again, what we would call today תעודת בגרות. Right? He gets his back then it was called smichat chaver, an ordination to be a member, a comrade, right? Chaver, a member of the Jewish society or elite maybe. So you learn for 4 years. You are now, you can learn for yourself. So there was like, they had this system. They had a smichat chaver, that was the basic ordination. Then they had, we can be called harav, and then that was like the BA, and then the MA or the doctorate was that you would call morenu. So and these were 3 different smichot. As far as I was able to, to see and to search, he never got anything beyond smichat chaver. So that is the most basic element. So in the shul, when he would be called to the Torah, they wouldn't say harav, they wouldn't say morenu, they would just say hachaver Avraham Danzig. So again, very interesting, one of the greatest of the generation, but he didn't bother to acquire the highest semicha. Okay, so we have the ordination that he got, like as I said, the teuda that he got. And back then they would not give grades, they would write. So his rabbi, that's in source bet, so this Rabbi Yosef Lieberman, we speak about 1766, right? He's 18, and he writes about him צעיר לימים ורח בשנים, so you also call him soft. Very interesting. It seems that maybe that was his personality. ודעתו מיושבת כדעת זקנים, but his mind is very sharp, and he's like an elder in his understanding. תלמיד המחכים את רבותיו, שומע חוכמותיו. So he's a student, but he's also able to sharpen his own rabbis with his questions and comments. ישק שפתותיו, הוא נהיו תלמידי הבח, תלמידי, excuse me, that is my student, הבח, that is, I guess, הבחור החשוב. The important is not married yet, so he's בחור. So the important guy, המופלא, the wonderful, כמר אברהם, בהחבר רבי מיכל מדנציג. So his father was also not a rabbi, but a חבר, again, this basic ordination. הוא אברהם מילדי הענקים, ממרותיו מדבש מתוקים, בקיא בצש ופוסקים. Okay, it's a beautiful rhyme. ידיו רב לו לפלפל בשפתו, he's brilliant, he's beautiful, he knows everything, he knows גמרא, לא נמצא עוולה בשפתו, סדורה ושגורה בפיו משנתו, and he knows his Torah. I skip, it's beautiful to read, but I skip, and he says, ראוי הוא להללו בהילולה דרבנן, so he is deserving to be praised as a הילולה דרבנן in the party or in the meeting of the rabbis, and he is the חבר, זה שמו אשר יקראו לו, that's his name from now on, החבר, רבי אברהם, בהחבר רב יחיאל. So he is being granted, he is being given this honorific, right, of being called החבר. Now, we know that he continued to learn after he graduated from Rabbi Yosef Lieberman Yeshiva. He went to the yeshiva of the Noda B'Yehuda. He was not there for long. We don't have exact dates. He was not there for long. In some of his later writings, he would refer to the Noda B'Yehuda as Mori v'Rabbi. So we do know that he went there. We know that he learned there. What was the type of relationship between him and the Noda B'Yehuda? I apologize. I just don't know. And he, after 2, 3, maximum 4 years, he is A, leaving Prague and going to Vilna, B, getting married. What exactly is the order of these 2 events? And how are they interrelated? If they are interrelated, again, a mystery. We do not know. Some claim that his wife, her name was Sarah, which is beautiful because he was named Avraham. So his wife was called Sarah. And some claim that his wife was from Vilna. So he went to Vilna in order to marry her, or maybe they married, and then she said, I want to go back to my parents. And they went to Vilna. Now, we do, again, unfortunately, about his wife, we know next to nothing. What we have is what was written on her tombstone after her death. But it is, I apologize, but it is very generic, meaning it says that here lies Sarah, the wife of Avraham, and there are some game in psukim, playing psukim because they are named Avraham and Sarah. It is said that she helped him a great lot. So she enabled him to do his work. She enabled him to write his sfarim. And as she helped him in ha'olam hazeh, she hopes that he would help her to reach a good state in ha'olam haba. That is what is written in the tombstone. And beyond that, I'm sure that she was a dedicated wife and mother. But beyond that, we just don't know. Okay. So he's in Vilna. Now, you would expect that that's how my shiurim usually go. He came to Vilna, he became the Rav of Vilna, everyone bowed to his feet, and okay, but that's not our story today. As I said, that's an unusual story. Because he came to Vilna and became a trader, a businessman. He became a businessman. And he was... I mean, obviously, he was a genius. If he was not a genius, he would not have written this thing, and that's only part of his writings. And I would not have spoken about him more than 150 years after his death. So obviously, we're speaking about someone that was phenomenal. But he had a tradition from his family not to take on rabbinate rules. As they say, a rabbi is not a sweet, it's not a proper position for a good Jewish boy. All right, so he had this tradition that he would not become a rabbi. And he writes about that at length. And if you'd grant me, I would like to read with you a very lengthy, not very lengthy, but for our shiur, a very lengthy piece that he wrote in his introduction to his second book. Right, that's the first book, the Chai Adam. He has a second book named Chochmat Adam. Chochmat Adam. And in the introduction, the preface to the second book, that was written after he became a rabbi, so I'm spoiling a little, he writes, why did he refuse to become a rabbi for more than 2 decades in Vilna? And he writes the following, source Gimel. Da lecha achi, know my brother. So he's writing this introduction, and he's very informal. So he always writes in this second body. That's second person. Thank you. Second person. Da lecha achi, know my brother. Ki nesiati lemerchakim. You are right. I was traveling a lot, but the purpose was not lekabetz osher chalila. That's so interesting. He says, God forbid that you will think that my purpose was to gather money or to be rich. He says, for us, usually we don't think that it's a chas v'chalila to have this purpose or goal to become rich. But he says, no, it's chalila. That's not why I became a businessman. Ya'id alav adon hakol. God can witness for me. רק לפרנס בני ביתי. My only purpose was to give what we say, בכבודיק פרנסה, right, an honorable פרנסה to my family. וירושה היא בידיי מאבותיי הקדושים. And that's an inheritance I have, that's my legacy from my forefathers. הלא הוא אדוני אבי זקני, הרב הגדול המפורסם בדורו, לצדיק תמים, מורנו הרב שמואל, בעל המחבר ספר נחמת ציון. So he says, my grandfather, he wrote a Perush on Sefer Yeshayahu, and again, we know very little about him. The Chai Adam was his grandchild, and he says that he was a tzaddik mefursam bedor, he was a righteous man, he was famous in his generation, and he says he was so, I will skip a little, but he says he was so righteous that one day he fell asleep he was learning a book, and he fell asleep on the book. Now, that in itself does not necessarily mean he was so righteous. But while he was asleep, he got a revelation. So that's the grandfather of our hero. So the grandfather got a revelation. His own mother came to him in a dream while he was sleeping on the book, on the Sefer, and told him, you should know that there is a plague, an illness, what we call pandemic, coming down your way. So run. We tried in the heavenly world. We did our best to prevent it, but we were not able to. So run for your life. And this grandfather collected all of his family and tried also to warn his relatives. As you can imagine, some believed, some not, but they were able to be saved. There was indeed a pandemic in the city, and he and his family were saved for this warning for warning that he got. Now, I fell asleep on my safari many times. Never I was told anything about the future. So obviously, he was much more righteous than I am. And so that's how he said. So obviously, don't think that he was someone that was a nobody. But nonetheless, now I skip to זה היה דרכו. I hope that you can see that. זה היה דרכו כל ימיו. So he was a righteous man, but all of his life לא נהנה מהתורה. He did not get a penny, a nickel or a dime for teaching Torah. והיו לו 10 בנים, yes, וקלקל אותם בכבוד בהגיע כפו. And he was able to feed them from his own work. He never went to the community, never asked for money. Everything was from his own work. I would say if you have 10 children, there is no way you can make money from Rabbanut in order to... that's in itself a reason why you should work, why you should work. But nonetheless, obviously, that's not what he meant. So he lived and he worked and he didn't want to earn money from Rabbanut. Now, that's a strength obviously in Jewish halacha. We also remember the Rambam writing very strongly against people that are living by the Rabbanut. Obviously, we do not like these people. I'm kidding. All right, so that's if someone that is able to do so, someone that is able to be a trader, someone that is able to be a businessman and produce this type of work, what can I say? Right? What can I say? So obviously, is Ashrei him, praised be him, and praised be his share. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And he says, היה דורש לרבים בדברי מוסר, ובצע כסף לא, so he'd give drashot, but not as the darshanim that were walking back then between the cities and giving a drasha and then walking with the hat, right, and getting money. So no, my father would give drashot for free. Just come and you can learn Torah. וגם אני הלכתי בעקבותיו, ולא זזה הוראה מתוך ביתי, זה יותר מ-20 שנה. He said, I went in his trails, right? I went in his footsteps. And 20 years, when he writes the Chochmat Adam, that's 1814. So he was born in 1748. This book was written in 1814. So if you do the quick math, then, 56. So he was 56. And he writes, I'm for 20 years now, I am teaching Torah. I am giving answers. People come to me with questions in halacha, and I am giving them sheilot, and I am giving them answers. ולא נעשה דבר גדול בקהילתנו בלתי הסכמתי. It was so important in his קהילה, in his community, that they would not do any takana, anything new, without first consulting with him. לא בכסף ולא במחיר. But I never took money for all of this communal work and teaching and learning Torah and giving psakim. Until he says, and that's in 1814, עד זה שנתיים שמטה ידי. So he lost all of his money. He was a very successful trader for decades, from the age of 20 to 55, more or less. And then he lost all of his money. And we have to remember, back then there is no social security. There is no pension. There's no nothing. If you lost your money, that's the capitalist world of the 18th century. If you lost your money, you can eat from the garbage can. That's what there is. No safety network, no social security, no ביטוח לאומי, as we would call it here. Nothing. And he said, so now he's 55. Now beginning anew in the age of 55, after you lost all of your money, I am not saying that it's impossible, but it's very hard. It's very hard.
But he has his children.
So why didn't they support him?
This in situation like that.
I will tell you a joke that my father, Zichrono Livracha, was very fond of telling, which maybe does not reflect too much good on me, but he was always saying that a father can grow exactly. I guess that you're from the same era in Romania. I says, because it's the original is in Romania. So you would say that that the father can raise 10 children, but 10 children cannot raise one father. Cannot. Yes, and everyone here is agreeing. So you see, that's just the word. I mean, you're right. You're right. Maybe he didn't want to be supported by his children. It seems that he had his own dignity. So he became a rabbi. Again, what can I do? I have to teach what the material is, even if it does not reflect too good on me. So he says, עד השנתיים שמטה ידי, והייתי מוכרח לקבל עליי עול הוראה בקבלת פרס, and to receive some salary, שהתירה התורה לתלמידי חכמים בזקנותם. Because I'm elderly, I cannot work anymore, so the Torah allows me to get a salary from being a רב, וברוך אשר עשה לי הנפש הזה מעודי שלא לאהוב ממון. He says, blessed be God, that I was never money lover. So he says, it's not even something that I worked on. I was just born like that. I am not seeking for money. And that's obviously someone that is modest, that is not seeking for money, his life are much better. I think that we can all, either if we seek for money or not, we can all agree that someone that it suffices for him what he has, and he's not looking always for more, you'd have a happier life. And I want to continue. As I said, it's lengthier than what we usually read here, but it's so beautiful, and he writes, it's such a beautiful Hebrew, simple and direct. I wanted to read with you the rest. ודע לך אחי, again, and you should know my brother, כי לימוד התורה ופעולת הנפש ותולדותיה. Learning Torah, he says, it's not only information that you soak in. It's what we would call today, it's a muscle that you operate. So if you keep working on it, it is becoming stronger and it preserves it. But if you leave it unattended, then it would degenerate, like a muscle. So I skip a few lines. כך האיש הישראלי. You know what? Let's read the middle as well. He says, כמו שאמרו זיכרונם לברכה על האישה, שאם אין דעתה להינשא, וישבה 10 שנים בלא בעל, לא תלד. ואם דעתה להינשא לאיש, אף שישבה שנים הרבה בלא דעת, בלא בעל, אף על פי כן נשאר כוח הלידה בנפשה, וכאשר נישאת תלד. So, I don't know about the biology, but he says, it's very interesting, he says, if a woman sits for 10 years, and she does not will to get married, then she may lose her ability to beget children. But if she's always looking to get married, she wants children, then even if you take 20 years, when she would be able to marry, she would have children. Why? Because it's the same idea. She's like practicing her being in relationship, her being a mother. Now, again, I obviously I don't know if medically that's correct, but it's a beautiful example. And he says the same thing applies to Torah, even if you're not able to learn right now. But if you are willing to learn, then you are activating your muscle, your brain muscle, your mind muscle, your spiritual muscle. And it will not degenerate. איש הישראלי, אם יעזוב את התורה, if you abandon Torah, הוא מייאש ממנה, and you say that you are מתייאש, disperse from the Torah, אזי גם היא מרוחקת ממנו, then the Torah would also abandon you. But if you are always looking for Torah, then even if you're a businessman, even if you do not have too much time, but during the whole day, you are in your store, you are in going to the fair in Leipzig, in Berlin, in Paris, and he's telling all of these stories about the fairs that he was going to. But he says, if your mind is in Torah, you remain connected to Torah. He says so many times, בנסיעתי לדרך, דעתי עליה, בישיבתי בחנות, דעתי עליה. I'm driving, I think about the Torah. I'm sitting in the store, I think about the Torah. You know that Aharon Razael is an Israeli singer. He took these words, דעתי עליה, דעתי עליה, and he made it into a song. I will send you, בעזרת השם, in the group, a beautiful song of Aharon Razael, because it's so moving. Because he describes, on the one, he's not a professional rabbi. He doesn't sit the whole day learning. He goes around, he's buying, he's selling, he's negotiating. But he says, my mind is with the Torah. ויעידו עליי הסוחרים, he says, the other traders would witness for me, שאפילו בעת נסיעתי בלייפציג. So I don't know what was happening in Leipzig, but it was a big fair, and I guess that people there were engaged in other things from learning Torah. And he says, even when I went to Leipzig, לא מנעתי לקח עמי גמרא ומקרא ומשנה. I was traveling with a bag. Nowadays you take a small Kindle, right? And you have the whole library of the whole world in your palm. But he needs to take a bag with all of these books. גמרא, משניות, וחיי, he says, every day I learned a daf and a half of Gemara. So that's not daf yomi, right? That's more than a daf yomi. A daf and a half. And also mishnayot. And he says, I don't write it. Chayei Rashi, taken off. In my life, he says. I do not write it, להתגאות ולהתפאר, in order to demonstrate how am I great. כי מה אני ומחיי? I know that I am nothing. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai told us that even if you learn a lot of Torah, do not hold to yourself. So it's not out of vanity I write that. But why? Because I want to teach you. רק לידע ולהודיע שטועים מאוד הסוחרים. The traders are wrong. The businessmen are wrong. The working men are wrong by thinking that because they work, they don't have time to learn Torah. Here, I was able to learn Torah, even that I was a trader, and here is the book that I'm producing. And he says, it seems that the fair in Yiddish was called mess. And he says, people were saying as a joke, that mace patur min mitzvot. A mace, a dead man, is patur min mitzvot. So the Yiddish mace, dead, met, and the Yiddish for fair is the same word. So he says, that's a bad joke. He writes it down, it's a bad joke. Don't listen to it. You can go to the fair, you can go to the mace, and still be learning Torah, still be teaching Torah, still be writing halachot. And he says, if one of my children would pick up this trait, then it is good for me that I wrote this whole lengthy introduction. So that's a reflection of the manual. So again, very different from your usual rabbi. And he writes the books. Now, in the year of 1804, so I apologize that we are going a little back and forth. So we just read from an introduction he wrote in 1840, right, about we said 1814. But in 1804, 10 years before, he's still a tradesman, still a businessman, there was an explosion in the house he was living in. There was a wax rifa, a barrel of gunpowder, which I'm not sure why people would have gunpowder in a residential area, but they had. Oh wow, I didn't know that. Before. And the whole thing, yeah. So someone, I guess someone maybe smoked, or you have to remember that back then there was no electricity, so everything was lit by fire, and it's enough that a candle would fall down or a spark would go, and the whole yard was blown away. And he writes about it in the end of the second part of the Chaye Adam. You have it here in source Daled. So it's the last halacha in the Chaye Adam. He writes that if someone had a personal miracle, he can do his own Purim, and put it for generations. And he put for his descendants for generations to celebrate. That was Tetzayin Kislev, a week before Hanukkah, to celebrate, because, so as I said, the whole yard blew away, and he says the houses fell down, the ceiling fell down. He says no one was saved from some injury. And he describes that his wife, Sarah, who's still alive, she was injured in her face. Her lip was cut, and she lost all of their lower teeth. Yeah, so a disastrous event. Obviously, the health insurance back then, right? Teeth insurance was not great, and so that was a very bad situation. And the son that was injured, and he himself was injured. But Baruch Hashem, from his family, no one died. So he made it a Purim, but 31 other people were killed in this disaster. So he made a Purim with a Tanit Esther before. He said one day of a fast day for those that were killed, and then a day of celebration for those that survived. That's an ancient Jewish, I think, wisdom. So that's his Purim. He called it gunpowder Purim. The Yiddish word is Pulver.
No.
Fulver? What's the
Pulver.
Pulver? Yeah, Pulver Purim. That's how they called it. What can I say? It's very sad, but I guess that was part of who he was, right? A very active man. He also made a promise to himself that he would try to make aliyah. When he was saved from this explosion, he said that he would try to make aliyah. He wrote a book named Sha'arei Tzedek, which is not part of these volumes, but it is being sold separately. And that is a book about the halachot of the mitzvot of Eretz Israel. Because he said, before I come there, I need to learn the halachot of trumot, of masot, of shmita, etc., etc., etc. So he writes a whole book, and in the introduction he says, if I would be granted after, he says, I need first to marry my children. It's very interesting. So I said, first I need, so again, a very practical man. I first need to marry my children. After I marry my children, if God would grant me, I would make aliyah. And if not, he says, then at least learning the halachot of Eretz Israel is like, in a sense, it's like residing there. Unfortunately, as we know, after he married his children, he had this, he went bankrupt, as we saw earlier. So he was not able to make aliyah, which was very expensive back then. And that's why he stayed in Vilna. So unfortunately, we didn't manage to have him in Eretz Israel, but we do have his halachot book called Sha'arei Tzedek. But his major work, which up till now we just went around and didn't speak about, is again this Chaye Adam, the man of life, the life of man. But I think again in Yiddish it would sound better. It's Mench life. Now it's Chaye Adam. Now the Adam is a hint to his name. Avraham, Danzig. His father's name was Michal. So Avraham, Danzig, Michels, I guess. That would be the Yiddish pronunciation. So that's why I call it Chaye Adam. What is the Chaye Adam? It obviously doesn't need my my approval, but it's a brilliant work. What he did was, he said, learning halacha is extremely difficult. Because I ask you, try to learn the Shulchan Aruch. It's a very hard work. It's a very difficult work. And it took you a long time. And when you would go to the middle of it, you would already not remember what you learned in the beginning. It's a very difficult work, Sefer. So he said, now again, he was a businessman. He was very practical. He said, I need to produce something that would be efficient. Right? You know what is efficient? Mukhvan Yeilut. What is the English word? Yeah, tachles. That's the English word. You're right. I looked for something fancy, but you're right. But he was efficiency geared man. So he said, how do I produce something that people can learn halacha from in the easiest way? And it is not geared towards the greatest rabbanim. That's not what I'm looking for. I am looking to give a halacha handbook for someone that can read Hebrew. So there is some entrance condition. You need to be able to learn Hebrew, to read Hebrew. But in Lithuania of the 18th century, that was a reasonable access condition. Now you remember we learned about Rabbi Yaakov Kuli in Kusta in Turkey of the 18th century, the beginning of the 18th century. There it was not a reasonable condition. People that did not know, the usual people, the random people did not know Hebrew good enough. So he needed to write in Ladino. But the Chaye Adam felt secure enough to write it in Hebrew and people would be able to follow. So what he does is, he's taking all of the Orach Chaim section. Orach Chaim includes the Chagim, Shabbat, Tfilot, Brachot, your day-to-day mitzvot, and recompile them. Not only the Shulchan Aruch, also all of the Pirushim, everything, and some new ideas of his, and recompile it. Now, that looks very big, but that's because the print is very big, and also because they added notes. But the original book was 1 volume, and he says if you take half an hour a day, you can finish it by half a year, and if you'd read it, then in a year, you'd read it twice, and you'd be like one of the rabbis. You'd be like one of the rabbis. That's a very interesting shtoch, I guess. So you can spend 20 years in yeshiva going around yourself, or he says, read my book. Now, again, he's a businessman, so his introduction is also like a sales. Yeah, exactly. There are sales points. So he says, you should buy my book. If you're a young student, that's great for you. That's an entrance to the world of halacha. If you are a middle-aged man and you are now working, that is the best book for you. Why? Because you don't have time. I know. I was there. I am there. And you can learn from my book. Even if you are a Rav, sometimes you is the Rav, right? You don't know really what the halacha. You learned all of the Gemara, all of that, but you don't know what is the bottom line. Read my book, and you know what is the bottom line. So that's the introduction to the Chai Adam. Yes, there's seven, I guess, selling points, selling groups, right? That says I can sell to them. So beautiful, brilliant. And that took a hold in Lithuanian Jewry for more than 100 years. Halacha was decided by what is written in the Chai Adam. In Hungary, they had later the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. But in Lithuania and in most of Poland, the Chai Adam was the final word. Now, some rabbis were not happy with that because he was not a rabbi. He was not a rabbi. How can it be that a businessman would write the most popular, thank you, the most popular halacha book? So he was attacked. And he knows that. That's why he wrote this lengthy introduction that we read earlier in the second book, in the Chochmat Adam. The Chochmat Adam, this Chai Adam is on Orach Chaim. Chochmat Adam is on Yoredea. Yoredea is Basar Bechalav, is Tolaim, worms, is Melicha. Back then, everyone would do Melicha, right? Salting the meat in their own home. So he gave all of the practical halachot needed for your household in the Chochmat Adam. It didn't it took hold as good as the Chai Adam, but also it is very well-read work. So for more than 100 years, and people, and as I said, some rabbis were not very happy with that because they said, no, it's too, maybe it is too much popular, is degrading halacha, and who is he to write a halacha book? But he did not get scared. One of the best things in being a businessman and writing halacha is that you are not dependent on the community. You don't depend on anyone. I'm writing my books and I pay for the publishment. You are happy, buy. You're not happy, don't buy. He didn't even want any approvals, any haskamot on the Sfarim. He said, I'm writing my own thing. I mean, I don't need haskamot. If people are not happy, don't buy. But in the end, his good friend was Rav Chaim of Volozhin. Rav Chaim Volozhiner, we spoke about in the shiur about Rav Chaim Volozhiner, who also established, you remember, the first yeshiva, the first modern yeshiva in Volozhin. And Rav Chaim Volozhiner said, I would write you an haskama. And if Rav Chaim Volozhiner is writing an haskama, fine. So he had the haskama of Rav Chaim Volozhiner, and then he was able also to put another haskama. I think that Rav Chaim Volozhiner didn't want him to become too much of a non-traditional. So he had these two haskamot. And it's so interesting. It's even, there is a rabbi I hope that you speak about named Rabbi Chizkiyahu Medini. He was in Eretz Israel, in Hebron, and in other places. He was a Sephardi rabbi. He wrote a very famous book named the Sdeh Chemed. And in it, he has a note. He says, I once told an halacha in the name of the Chai Adam. He lived about 50 years later. And someone told me, how can you call the Chai Adam? He was just a businessman. And then he writes in the book. So I was taken aback. And then he writes a long list, a whole page of great rabbis that quoted the Chai Adam. He says, if all of these great rabbis quoted him, so he is kosher enough. He's kosher enough. And as I said, in his introduction to the Chochmat Adam, the Chai Adam himself, Rabbi Avraham Danzig himself says, I was a businessman, but you should know that I was a businessman not in order to make money, but in order to preserve the legacy of my family, of not being financed by the Rabbanut, and I was always learning Torah. So don't think that I just came from nowhere. And again, in the end, people vote by their feet. So the book became extremely popular. Why did it fall out of use? Because I guess that if I would poll now, then very few of you learned Chai Adam. Why did it fall out of use? So basically, 100 years after the publication of the Chai Adam, in the beginning of the 19th century, the Mishnah Bura, Rabbi Israel HaKohen Meradin, published his book, the Mishnah Bura, and it replaced more or less, it took some years, so it took some decades, but after World War II, it completely replaced the Chai Adam. There are a few reasons. One is, it was just more updated. And the Mishnah Bura includes the Chai Adam and others. The Chai Adam does not include the Mishnah Bura. So that's one, I mean, just an update. The second reason is, and I think that's, the second reason is differences of technology. The Chai Adam lives in a world in which, as I said, there is no electricity, there are no trains, so many things lack. Now, the Mishnah Bura is also very far from being the last world in technology. Poland of the beginning of the 20th century was not the most advanced place in the world, but it was more inclusive, so that's a second reason. But to be honest, I think that it's very important to understand the rise and the decline of the Chai Adam, because it's not only the rise and the decline of a certain book. It's the rise of a decline and a certain type of personality. And that is the classic working Lithuanian Jew. It's very important. That's the Chai Adam Jew. There is such a man, the Chai Adam Id, as they would say. They would have chaburot between Mincha and Mariv, learning groups, learning the Chai Adam. The Chai Adam, I mean, you had the great rabbis, you had people that were completely ignorant, so that they were hardly able to learn Parshat Shavua, and you had the people, and these were the middle class in Lithuania, people that would sit in shul with Mincha and Mariv and learn the Chai Adam and the Chochmat Adam, but mostly the Chai Adam. So these were people that were learned, again, not great Torah scholars, but they were learned people and wise people, and they just disappeared. Now, there are a few reasons why they disappeared. One is Haskalah, secularism, enlightenment, as an indirect effect also Zionism. And the second, which anyway, I don't compare now the two reasons, I hope that that's clear. But in the Holocaust, most of these type of Jews just perished. And what you remained with either people that are not able to learn the Chai Adam, they cannot learn Hebrew, they cannot learn in Hebrew, or people that are beyond the Chai Adam, we may say. The Chai Adam was not the target audience. Now, these second type of people, yeshiva students, you may say, people that learn in yeshiva not for 2 years, but for 10 years or 15 years, they learn the Mishnah Bura. The Mishnah Bura is a much more difficult work than the Chai Adam. Anyone who learned Mishnah Bura, I guess most of the people learn Mishnah Bura to some extent. It's an extremely difficult work. It is not, while the Chai Adam recompiled the whole thing into something that is readable, the Mishnah Bura is a pile of notes on the Shulchan Aruch. It's very hard to read. It takes much more time, and it's, in the end, not always it's more efficient, if I may say so, than the Chai Adam. Because many times you go into tangles and you go into situations that are not very relevant to the common man. While the Chai Adam, as I said, his work of life was to be efficient, to be directed to the life of the regular man. But between 1950, again, I'm now making gross, obviously, generalizations. But between 1950, let's say, 1945, the end of the Second World War, and 1985 or 75, this type of men just almost disappeared from the map. So you had the yeshivot, which were very strong, and you had people that knew almost nothing, and you didn't have this middle ground between them. And that's why the Chai Adam fell out of use. Now, Baruch Hashem, in the last few decades, we do have emerging class, we may say, of people that learn in yeshiva or midrasha or whatever for 2 or 3 years. They are able to learn Hebrew. They are interested in what the Chai Adam has to say. But now it's very difficult to return to a book that is 150 years old. So we have new books. In English, it would be the Art Scroll Halacha series, right? You're familiar, I guess, with the Basar Bechalav and the Nida. And in Hebrew, we have, let's say, the Pnei Halacha. The Pnei Halacha, for people that are familiar with the Pnei Halacha, that is a sort of a modern Chai Adam. Written very, very accessibly, directed to the working man. It's not directed to the rabbis. The rabbis also enjoy it. I use the Pnei Halacha. So it's a modern incarnation of the חיי Adam. So I do recommend sometimes to some of my students to learn the חיי Adam because it is just a great book, and it's easy Hebrew, and it's a very good balance between halacha, bottom line, and lamdanut, but also give you the scholarly behind the halacha, scholarship behind the halacha. But here in the shul, I guess I would not recommend. If someone has a very strong hit on the חיי Adam, then yes. But if not, there are other books. But still, we have to appreciate so many shuls, cloisters in Lithuania were called the חיי Adam shul. People that didn't know the חיי Adam, but they called him the חיי Adam shul because they felt this connection with the businessman that became the halacha man for his generation. Now, he was also mechutan with the Gaon of Vilna. Now, what does it mean, a mechutan? His son was married to the granddaughter of the Vilna Gaon. So he was speaking with the Vilna Gaon in learning, and in his חיי Adam, there are a few places in which he brings the Gaon, and he disagrees with him. In the introduction to the Chokhmat Adam, he writes, that was censored later, but in the first edition of the introduction to the Chokhmat Adam, he says, people came to me, how do you dare to disagree with the Gaon of Vilna? You're just a businessman. He's the guy, he's the Vilna Gaon. Who are you? Disagree with him. He says, you know what? I don't want to argue. So in the Chokhmat Adam, I just didn't mention the Gaon of Vilna. So you wouldn't be angry with me. But you should know that your actions, instead of bettering the situation of the Vilna Gaon and spreading his memory, what you cause is that, no, I didn't mention the Gaon of Vilna. So what you are doing is reducing by being so stiff and by thinking that you are not allowed. Why can't I be cholek on the Gaon of Vilna? Why not? If the Rashba can be cholek on the Ramban, why? What happened? So that's a very interesting quick. Now, as I said earlier, his good friend was the Reb Chaim of Volozhin. Was the best student of the Vilna Gaon. But I guess there were other people there, smaller students, and sometimes it's the smaller students that are fighting more than the greatest students, because the big student or the good student, he understands that his rabbi had taught him a wide Torah, and he hung to the Torah that he was taught. But the small student, he doesn't really understand the Torah. So what he is hanging to is to the name of his rabbi, and he's fighting for the good reputation. No one should disagree with the Gaon of Vilna. No, that is incorrect. That is incorrect. In our tradition, it is incorrect. That is also, I think, a very interesting remark about the חיי Adam. Unfortunately, he had a few sons and daughters, but it seems that he has a very favorable son, if I may say so, whose name was Moshe, and he died in a very young age, in the age of 20. And the חיי Adam writes a few works in the memory of this. He says he didn't have children, so I promised him that I would dedicate sefarim in his memory. Shem olam eten lo tov mibanim umibanot. So I give him a perpetual name, an eternal name, better than the children. And so he has a book named Mitzvat Moshe, which is it's a certain type of a shorthand of all of the mitzvot of the Torah that you can learn. He has Zichru Torat Moshe, which is Halachot of Shabbat. That was the last book that he published. But obviously that devastated him. At the age of, at the year of 1821. So that is what, 7048 to 1821. Help me out, 73, I think. So at the age of 73, he passed away. He knew in his life that his sefarim were widely accepted. And while, as I said, I think he was extremely devastated by the death of his son, as is to be expected, he was rewarded. He was rewarded for his dedication to Torah, for his love of Torah. As I said, he was an influence and a reflection of a whole type of people, of the Lithuanian Jew, that we have a lot, I think, in our generation now, we have a lot to learn from them, even if we would not, I mean, it's a beautiful sefer, but even if we do not find it responding to the needs of the middle-class Jew anymore, but we have a lot to learn from the way that he conducted himself. And with that, we are done with the חיי אדם, and בעזרת השם, we'll continue next week. Thank you so much all for joining, and שבוע טוב.
Thank you very much. שבוע טוב.